Hello, and in this video we are going to examine how to do an independent samples t-test. So, an independent samples t-test allows us to determine if there's a difference between two groups. Now, before you get to doing an independent samples t-test, it is assumed that you've done some sort of examination on the descriptive statistics. So that would include things like the means, median, mode potentially, and maybe the range as well. So if you're not sure of those steps, make sure you go back a little bit and revise that content before doing this statistical test. So as I said, it allows us to determine if there's a difference between two groups. So for example, a researcher or a physiologist or a sports scientist could have a question, and that could be, is there a difference in vertical jump performance between a squad of elite football or rugby players? And if you had two sets of data from these two groups, an independent samples t-test is what you would use to analyse these, assuming as well that the data is parametric. And I'll come on to that in a second. When we're doing statistics tests, all the results of the test are determined by the p-value, and this indicates the likelihood of our findings being due to chance. And we want our p-value to be as small as possible, and ideally below our alpha threshold, which we set at 0.05. Anything less than this value is determined to be statistically significantly different. I'm going to start again with our decision tree just to allow us to follow through the steps that we need to take to get to an independent samples t-test. So if we look on the right hand side of our tree, we are looking for differences between groups, and the independent samples t-test uses parametric data. Again, if you're unsure on what parametric or non-parametric is, go back and revise normal distribution, skewness and kurtosis so that you can better answer the difference between these two. So assuming we've got parametric data, we come down to different groups, and then we are looking for this test here. If you've got more than two conditions or two groups, you would choose a one-way ANOVA, but this presentation is just focusing on two, so we're doing an independent samples t-test. Now the output and the steps for an independent samples t-test are demonstrated on the slide. The instructions are written here on the right hand side in italic font, so this is what you would need to click in SPSS to make it work. Now the boxes are copy and pasted here from our SPSS output, and we see some information that's presented. So we've got our height in centimetres for males and females. The next column in with an N represents the number of people in each of those conditions. So we see there's 93 males, 39 females. It then goes on to report our mean and standard deviation for these sets of data. The next big box down is an independent samples test, and what it will first of all do, you've got to be very, very careful when looking out for Levene's test for equality of variances. This value provides you a sig value, but this is not the p-value that tells us whether height in males and females is different. This just tells us which row of the independent samples box to look at. So if the number within the blue circle is above 0.05, you stay on the top line of data within the table. However, if it was to be below 0.05, you go for the lower row of data. In this instance, obviously 0.96 is greater than 0.05, so we're going on the top row of the table. And the value you are interested in is in the column sig two-tailed. This is the p-value that we're interested in, and here in our table we've got 0.000. So this indicates our p-value is very, very small, which indicates there's a high chance it's statistically significantly different, because the p-value is less than 0.001 in this instance. SPSS only reports it to 3 decimal places, but it means the p-value is technically smaller than this. So we have got a significant difference in height between males and females. So we come back to SPSS here, and this is going to be instructional on how to actually conduct that independent samples t-test. So to do that, we click Analyze, Compare Means, and then Independent Samples t-test. Now the test that we're going to look at is comparing height between males and females. So our height goes in the test variable box, whereas gender goes into our grouping variable box. Now you'll notice after I transfer gender, it comes up with these 2 question marks, and here I click Define Groups, and all I need to do is just type Group 1 and Group 2 into these Group 1 and 2 boxes. Click Continue, and your t-test is ready to go. So by clicking OK, it'll bring up the new window, and this is the SPSS output window that we're interested in. The top one here is obviously our group statistics, and giving us our number of people in each group, means and standard deviation. But then we come down to our independent samples t-test, and remember we need to look for Levene first of all, and because it's above 0.05 we use the top row of numbers, and we're after our p-value here, which as we see is less than 0.05. So this t-test is highly significantly different, and we can say that males are higher or are taller than females, because as we see from the mean and standard deviation, especially the mean, that males are taller. So that's what this t-test is showing us.